We're taking a look back at the biggest political turning points, trends, and controversies as we hit rewind on Rising. We've got the power players, scandals, and outrageous decisions that have defined our conversations.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. Robbie, what do we have?
Well, Michael Starr Hopkins and Marissa Martinez are in for Team Rising to discuss the White House's fight against OSHA's hold on the workplace vaccine mandate. And of course, Brianna Joy Gray discusses details of Biden's Build Back Better tax cuts. Plus, Pablo Manriquez weighs in on the social spending bill's immigration provisions, and we can expect to see pass the Senate. But first, Ghislaine Maxwell's siblings filed a complaint to the United Nations this week and are requesting help in securing her bail ahead of her trial in connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Human rights lawyers filed an action with the UN Working Group on arbitrary detention and allege that Maxwell is subject to, quote, inhumane and degrading conditions, adding that the, quote, her demonization in the press prevents her from having a fair trial, according to Daily Beast reporter Kate Brickley.
This comes after Maxwell's legal request for documents from the settlement fund for victims of sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. The administrator of the Victims' Compensation Program opposed her request. Brickley reports that the legal scuffle comes as Maxwell battles to block evidence from appearing at the trial, including Epstein's address book of high-flying contacts, and a box containing a sex toy. The Victims' Fund closed in August and resulted in nearly $125 million paid out to more than 135 victims of Epstein. Women were required to waive the right to sue Epstein's estate and related entities, including Maxwell. Senior reporter at the Daily Beast, Kate Brickley, joins us to discuss the legal efforts being made by Ghislaine Maxwell's team ahead of her trial. Kate, welcome to Rising.
Thanks for having me.
What is this? What is the strategy starting to shape up to be that we can gather from these requests made so far?
Well, there's multiple strategies on multiple fronts, but I guess in terms of Ghislaine's defense counsel in America, she's trying to undermine the credibility of accusers in any way she can. That includes excluding certain evidence, such as Epstein's infamous Little Black Book. She's also trying to exclude evidence of a household manual. Most importantly, she's trying to exclude testimony from a woman referred to as minor victim 3 in the indictment, saying that this woman was of the age of consent in England when she was abused by Jeffrey Epstein. And so far, it seems that the judge is willing to limit some of this accuser's testimony. And already, the prosecution and Maxwell's lawyers are referring to her as accuser 3 or witness 3, as opposed to minor victim 3.
And, there's no age of consent to be abused. So how does this factor into whether or not this is going to be allowed to go forward?
Well, that's part of Maxwell's argument, is that these women perhaps had sex acts with Epstein that were consensual. She's probably going to argue consent in some of these cases, even though the government argues they were trafficked. There is no consent. This is sex trafficking, and people cannot consent to sex trafficking. But part of her defense will be, pointing out that the victims were of the age of consent in the various jurisdictions where they were abused. So I think Maxwell's team is throwing whatever they can into the bowl to see what sticks, essentially. The allegations against Maxwell are so serious that, at least in the court of public opinion, she's already guilty.
Well, right, and specific, and seeing what sticks. So her team is trying to make this argument to the UN that she's been subjected to what did she say? Unprecedented discrimination. It doesn't. Is there any merit to that? It doesn't look to me like she's been put through anything that is unprecedented in terms of the criminal justice system. What is there? Do they have a more specific argument?
Sure, and it should be noted that Ghislaine Maxwell's defense counsel says they had nothing to do with this petition to the UN, that it's some human rights lawyers in Paris that were concerned about how she was being treated. But as we've seen over the past year, Ghislaine's defense counsel in America has complained about her conditions at the Brooklyn detention facility where she's staying. And, to some observers, this is just another day at the office at a, federal detention facility, right? They kind of say that she shouldn't be complaining at all, that other prisoners have it worse and that she has certain privileges. But in that UN petition, Ghislaine's family says that the prison has violated Mandela rules on, certain requirements for prisoners and their care, things like prohibiting food or water or using restraints like irons and chains. So, they're asking this UN working group to urge the U.S. government to release her. And they say that Ghislaine, in her case, has faced discrimination at every turn, every time she's applied for bail, and even been willing to give up her citizenship in other countries and her millions of dollars in assets, that she's being treated differently than other high-profile defendants.
Well, it's not like the prison system has some sterling record in this case, right? The Jeffrey Epstein obviously did die or was killed or something really bad happened behind bars. So are they making anything of that?
Sure, and I think that Ghislaine's family wants to make her into sort of a poster child for criminal justice reform, right? I mean, there are problems in this jail. There's, problems with heat, food, water, lighting, just basic comforts, right? It's overrun with rats. Ghislaine has said she's been fed maggot-infested food. So it's not that her complaints are without merit. I think that some observers might say, well, everybody in the prison system has to deal with this. But it'll be interesting to see where her complaints go. And so far, the federal judge in the case, Allison Nathan, has been receptive to her complaints and making sure that she's being taken care of at the Brooklyn detention facility.
And real quickly, if they do manage to throw out these two young women who were of age in England, how damaging is that to the prosecution's case?
The prosecution has said that Accuser 3's testimony is being introduced to show that it was part of a pattern, part of a conspiracy, that Ghislaine Maxwell knew of Jeffrey Epstein's sexual preference for underage girls. But Accuser 3 isn't tied specifically to any counts in the indictment. So it's unclear whether, if Accuser 3's testimony is limited in any way, it's unclear whether it will impact the prosecution's case because they already have 3 other witnesses who will testify. But so far, Judge Nathan has indicated she will at least allow some of Accuser 3's testimony, which includes, according to a recent court filing, descriptions of a repugnant sex act. So we're waiting to see what Minor Victim 3 will say. A lot of what's being previewed for the trial is filed with redactions, and we're just not sure exactly who's going to testify and who's going to say what.
Yeah. Okay, Brigolay, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we will tell you what's on our radars up next.
Hey, Kim, what's on your radar?
Well, while the world focuses relentlessly on the new COVID variant, rising gas prices, and Biden not wearing a mask in Nantucket, something else is happening that would otherwise be getting front page coverage. The trial of Jeffrey Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. The names and strange connections to this case continue to pile up, and I'll reveal the latest coincidental connection and big name attached at the end. You'll have to wait for it. But first, let's go over a primer of the trial that will be taking place over the next, what they estimate to be 6 weeks. The trial begins today in Manhattan. Maxwell faces 6 charges directly related to sex trafficking and exploitation of underage girls. If convicted of all 6, she faces up to 70 years in prison. She also faces 2 counts of perjury, but those charges will be addressed in a separate trial that's yet to be set. So let's go over the 6 charges she faces in court today. Count 1. conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. Count 2, enticement of a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. Count 3, conspiracy to transport minors with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. Count 4, transportation of a minor with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. Count 5, sex trafficking conspiracy. Count 6, sex trafficking of a minor. I would say those charges are not good for Ghislaine Maxwell, but these charges do span over a 10-year period of time between 1994 and 2004 and involve 4 different victims, though we know there were likely many, many more. This particular court case only involves these 4. The indictment states that Ghislaine assisted, facilitated, and contributed to Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of minor girls by, among other things, helping Epstein to recruit, groom, and ultimately abuse victims known to Maxwell and Epstein to be under the age of 18. Basically, what the prosecution will be presenting is evidence that Ghislaine prepared these minor girls, some as young as 14, to engage in sex acts with Epstein. The young girls were enticed and recruited by Ghislaine and eventually would be groomed by Ghislaine to engage in paid sex acts that were labeled as massages. One victim accuses actually Ghislaine herself of participating in group sex with Epstein and the victim. These events would take place all over the country in Epstein's various residences, including Palm Beach, New Mexico, Manhattan, and even in Ghislaine's residence in London. Now, the victims, who are all now adults, will not be named in court. They will instead be allowed to use pseudonyms or their first names only. And this takes us to the topic of names. With so many powerful people connected to Jeffrey Epstein, which big names are we likely to hear in court? Well, probably no one's. That's right. We're likely to hear 0 powerful names dropped or implicated in this trial. Now, why is that? Because of the victims who have publicly dropped names, the prosecution left them out. There are no charges against Maxwell that involve any of the more well-known victims. For example, Virginia Giuffre, the most well-known of Epstein's victims, is not included in this trial. Giuffre is the one who claims she was trafficked to Prince Andrew. She also claims she was trafficked to New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, former U.S. Senator George Mitchell, lawyer Alan Dershowitz, modeling scout Jean-Luc Brunel, and billionaire Glenn Dubin. Now, why is she not included in the trial? Well, it's unclear. She says Ghislaine Maxwell was heavily involved in her exploitation, but for whatever unknown reason, the prosecution didn't bring up any charges related to Giuffre's case. Another victim who appears to be absent from the trial is Sarah Ransom. Ransom accused Epstein of raping her and accused both Epstein and Maxwell of recruiting her into their sex trafficking ring and lending her out to their friends, including Alan Dershowitz. Most importantly, Ransom was primarily stationed on Epstein's island in the Caribbean and would have seen and possibly interacted with the various influential people being flown on and off the island on Epstein's private jet, people such as Donald Trump and Bill Clinton, perhaps. In an interview with CBS News, Ransom stated, Ghislaine was Jeffrey's right hand, the lieutenant of the whole pyramid. She made sure we all stayed in line, that when we were called to his bedroom, that we went. However, in 2018, Ransom settled a case with Epstein and Maxwell, so it's not looking like she's included in the trial. Now, this takes us to a big name attached to the case that we'll be hearing a lot of during this trial, and that's Comey. Not James Comey, but his daughter Maurene. Maurene Comey is one of the 3 lead prosecutors in this Maxwell case. Maurene was also a lead prosecutor in the Jeffrey Epstein case before he allegedly killed himself over 2 years ago. She also worked on another Epstein-related case, that of Nicholas Tartaglione. Tartaglione, a former cop and quadruple murderer, was assigned to cell with Epstein and claims that he tried to help Epstein after he was found unconscious with marks on his neck, allegedly attempting suicide. But Epstein's attorney said he didn't attempt suicide, that it was Tartaglione who roughed him up. Later, Epstein was placed on suicide watch, and we all know how well that went. Now, if Tartaglione sounds familiar to you, it's probably because Ryan pointed out last week that Tartaglione's defense attorney is the same one now representing Ghislaine Maxwell. So Tartaglione, who was accused by Epstein of roughing him up, has the same defense attorney as Maxwell, who's being prosecuted by the same prosecutor who went after both Epstein and Tartaglione. If that doesn't confuse you enough already. One thing that I really want to bring up on this is that, in a district attorney's office, there are typically, especially one with the Southern District of New York, you're probably looking at hundreds of prosecutors, and they usually are assigned a variety of different types of cases. So a prosecutor would work in a division such as grand theft, or work in homicide, or work in sex crimes. So for this particular prosecutor, Comey, to have worked on Tartaglione's case, which is a quadruple homicide facing death penalty, and also now working on sex crimes of Epstein and Maxwell, it is a little bit, it's like, you couldn't find someone else out of the hundreds possibly prosecutors that you may have in the office. So there's we're seeing a lot of just connections with this case that are, making people kind of our heads spin. And of course, with this case beginning today, no one is allowed in the court. We're not going to see any press coming from it. People are camped outside the court waiting for any updates, but that's all we're going to get. So, just this kind of adds more layers to it. Ryan, what are your thoughts on this?
It also speaks to our fraudulent meritocracy, that the children of the elites getting all of these different advantages and then believing that they're getting them through their own merit. One thing that the Tartaglione case and the Maxwell case and the Epstein case have in common is that they're all getting covered in the news. Now, the Tartaglione case was a bigger deal in New York than it's not a global case like Epstein and Maxwell, but it was a big deal. This is an ex-cop, with a quadruple homicide. That's the kind of thing that the New York Post and the New York Daily News are gonna go wild with, throughout the course of the entire thing. So the way you rise through the ranks of prosecutor is by getting these high-profile cases. Every prosecutor wants these cases for that particular reason, so that Comey's daughter gets Epstein, Maxwell, and Tartaglione. Suggests that either she's the greatest prosecutor that they have in there, or there's politics going on that is enabling, the daughter of Comey to be given these, particularly plum assignments.
Or this just adds more layers to
and it does
what
that
already,
too, and it does that too, because it keeps it all centralized within this ring of extremely powerful people.
Right. And there's just a lot of conspiracy theories already around this case. And it's like, why add to it? Why couldn't you just find other people to handle this?
They should, but they could find someone else named like Clinton or something, or an unrelated
Trump.
Clinton. We swear. Would anyone believe that? Wouldn't that be funny?
Yeah. So we'll see how this case how this plays out. But of course, the prosecution, the defense team is saying, Maxwell is just being dragged through all of this because she's the only person that they can get because Epstein's dead. But she was heavily involved in this.
I guess they're not going to get Dershowitz for the defense either. but so he's not that accuser you just explained is not going to actually be part of the case, right?
That's what it's looking at this point like the accusers that have actually dropped names, none of them are involved in this case. And it's not just that they aren't testifying, there weren't any charges brought up that were pertinent to their accusations. So again, that raises more questions. Like, why was it that it was just these 4 victims? Why did they not include these other victims who've come out in the spotlight? There were at least 3 other victims that are not included in this. So, why is that? Why did the prosecution?
Do you think it could be the benign explanation, right, is that prosecutors did not find their claims credible or did not think there was enough evidence or there was some reason for them to not trust everything those accusers were saying and so then not want to go in that direction, or they thought it would just be more or they're making political considerations like this will be more difficult or more fraught for some reason. So, but we'll probably never know that.
Right, but then it goes to Kim's point that if you have one of the prosecutors is a daughter of James Comey,
right,
then she's in that social circle who would want to protect people in the social circle. That is certainly what you could plausibly deduce from that.
Yeah, this nepotism is not good. It's not good.
Well, it depends on who. It's good.
It's good. It's good for the nepot. That's not a word. Just made that up. Anyway, thank you, Kim. We'll have more Rising after this. You may remember our coverage of U.S. Virgin Islands delegate Stacey Plaskett's ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Well, journalist Lee Fong took a closer look and found that before Plaskett won a seat in Congress, she actually worked for Epstein's personal lawyer and tax accountant, known for peddling influence for the powerful pedophile. Investigative reporter Lee Fong joins us now to expand on this. So great to see you, Lee.
Good to see you.
So please tell us more about what you found. I think where we left the story off was evidence that she had wanted him to attend a fundraising event with full knowledge of who he was. This was up to, I think, just a year before his death. This was like 2018. So no pretending you didn't know what a monster he was, all of that kind of thing, the usual denials we get from people. This was full awareness. Tell us more about how deep her connections might have run.
Yeah, so the story that I wrote about Delegate Stacey Plaskett shows much deeper ties to Jeffrey Epstein than previously known. This is a sitting member of Congress, someone who votes in committee, who has a lot of influence in politics and the media, who, before she entered Congress in 2013 and 2014, worked for the boutique legal and accounting firm that served Jeffrey Epstein. This is Erica Keller Hall's firm in the Virgin Islands. We've seen in the media and so many reports, looking through documents, flight logs, connecting the dots of Jeffrey Epstein's network, that he cultivated influence with some of the leading private equity executives in this country, Leon Black and others, other corporate executives, political leaders, philanthropic leaders, prominent scientists and politicians. Well, here's someone who literally worked for one of Epstein's closest aides, someone who helped him peddle influence, win lucrative tax breaks, engage in a lot of the business deals, transfer the property that he used to molest and abuse women and engage in human trafficking, and who's still, connected to Epstein. Epstein, after he passed away, 2 days before he passed away, he signed documents to Erica Keller Hall that gave her control of his estate. She's continuing to work for his estate. So this was really one of Epstein's closest aides.
And your story paints the picture of a little bit of a cover-up here. You write that the 2 years during which Plaskett worked for Epstein's lawyer, those 2 years are notably missing from her LinkedIn account. And moreover, it's not just that she worked for this lawyer, but that she previously served as counsel on the Virgin Islands Economic Development Authority, which granted Epstein $300 million and allegedly improperly obtained tax exemptions over the course of 2 decades.
Yeah, this is really kind of an astounding fact about Epstein that has come to light in the last year with some of the latest litigation around his abuses. Epstein, purchased various properties in the Virgin Islands, of course, Little St. James Island, where he abused women, but also other properties. He domiciled there, and that was his residence. For his $500 million business empire, he received $300 million in tax exemptions over 20 years from the Special Economic Development Office in the Virgin Islands. He claimed that his company was a biotech startup studying gene technology, and therefore, needed special startup tax incentives. But there's no evidence that he engaged in any of this kind of startup activity. He just had property and financial investments. He improperly received these massive tax exemptions from excise tax, income tax, property tax, and there's still big questions about how he received these very lucrative tax credits given to him by this economic development agency, where Plaskett worked for several years. She then went through the revolving door to this specialized tax accountant legal firm, Erica Keller Hall's firm, that helped channel these tax credits to Epstein, and then went into Congress. And of course, the documents paint many other interesting details. Stacey Plaskett was introduced to Epstein by Erica Keller Hall's. Erica Keller Hall's helped facilitate many of the direct donations to Stacey Plaskett, as Plaskett solicited Epstein in 2018, a year before his death, for $30,000 to the DCCC, the House Democrats' campaign arm. Again, that was Erica Keller Hall's forwarding on that appeal.
And you write, in your Substack piece about this that Plaskett has misled the public about the extent of her ties to Epstein, which I think is very interesting given how militant she was, that every I and T be exactly crossed and dotted in, for instance, Matt Taibbi's testimony about the Twitter files where, because of the not significant but and corrected error about which acronym was involved, not that, we've gone over why ultimately that doesn't matter. And in fact, that agency was involved in the funding of this kind, was involved in the pressuring of the Twitter files. She, said that Taibbi should, reminding him that, perjuring yourself before Congress is a crime that could carry like 5 years in prison. Has she been as honest as she demands everyone else be with respect to her own involvement with Jeffrey Epstein?
Look, earlier this month, Stacey Plaskett appeared on the NPR affiliate station in the Virgin Islands to address some of these accusations that have come out in these recent court filings. And she claimed that she was unaware of Epstein's donations and was alerted by the media. That's clearly not true. We see from the many emails that you covered on this program and what I covered in my story that she was actively soliciting Epstein's money, knew exactly who he was. And during the same interview, she claimed that she was the only politician who received Epstein money to then donate that money back to charity. That's clearly not true. Many Virgin Island local legislators who received this money donated money to charity. Chuck Schumer, who received Epstein donations, gave it to charity. These emails show that there was a very methodical political operation from Epstein and his aides. He wanted exemptions to sex offender law, so he didn't have to disclose when he was traveling in and out of the country. He wanted these tax exemptions. And he also wanted to make sure that he had no local critics. Cultivating people like Stacey Plaskett meant that he wouldn't have as many prominent local critics of his criminal behavior. And look, at the end of the day, Stacey Plaskett did donate the $8,000 in direct donations she received from Epstein. But we see from this recently disclosed, unsealed court deposition that Epstein and his aides actually bundled $30,000, in excess of $30,000 to Stacey Plaskett. She has not donated those bundle donations to charity.
Incredible. And I don't suppose there's been much of a reaction, or I should just ask you, has there been any reaction from congressional Democrats about this or Republicans? And do you expect to find additional relationships as the J.P. Morgan case proceeds?
Well, look, as we've seen over the years of Epstein investigations, this was a bipartisan controversy. There were Republicans and Democrats that were in the world of Epstein and, traveled on his jet and received his either philanthropic or political donations. So there really hasn't been turned into a partisan kind of issue where one side's looking into it. Both sides have so far ignored the latest revelations that we see in these court filings. We will see many more disclosures from this litigation that's going forward in the Southern District of New York. J.P. Morgan was sued by two parties last year, a number of victims of Epstein. That case has been settled. But then there's this ongoing case between the Virgin Islands and J.P. Morgan that has really revealed this entirely not new, but newly unearthed political network in the Virgin Islands that Epstein controlled. The governor of the Virgin Islands, Governor Bryan, is set to be deposed. We'll see if those deposition records are filed in the court and released to the public.
Incredible reporting as usual. Lee Fong, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. Our quest continues, our quest being to deliver all the news that the viewers need to hear about to them every morning of every day until we depart this good earth.
That long, Robbie? That long?
You're in it for the long haul, Brianna. What are we talking about today?
All right, well, Robbie, another batch of Epstein documents are out. Here's what you need to know. Newly unsealed deposition records from 2016 reveal Epstein accuser Virginia Giuffre told prosecutors that she was paid $15,000 to have sex with Prince Andrew in the 1990s. Giuffre also claimed she recalled at least 2 occasions where former President Bill Clinton visited Epstein's island and dined with young women. She could not confirm any sexual abuse on Clinton's part. However, when asked whether the former president was a witness to the sexual abuse of minors, Ms. Giuffre said, yes, he would be a witness because he knew what my purpose there was for Jeffrey, and he visited Jeffrey's island. She added, there's pictures of nude girls all around the house at all of his houses, and it's something that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't shy about admitting to people. Giuffre also reported seeing Donald Trump at Epstein properties, but again did not accuse him of abuse.
Giuffre did name other names as well. She said she was trafficked, made to have sex with former Victoria's Secret CEO Lex Wexner more than 5 times. She also said that she was made to have sex with at least 2 American politicians, including former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson and former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell. She also named American businessman Glenn Dubin and former modeling agent Jean-Luc Brunel, and one other person whose name is still redacted in these documents, interestingly enough. Meanwhile, Epstein's brother, Mark, got into it with Leland Vittert on News Nation last night. Let's watch.
There's very few people who knew him the way you did, and you hear all these allegations that he was providing women, some of age, some not of age, to other men to compromise them. There's allegations of videotapes that have been recanted on and on and on, but does all that surprise you, or you hear about that and you kind of go, gee, there was always something about him that as a brother, you go, that kind of makes sense?
No, it doesn't make sense to me. I think he was just, like you said, he was just having a good time. Jeffrey liked to have a good time. And unfortunately, he chose to do it with women.
Hold on. There's a big difference, though, between having...
I wasn't there, so you're asking me to speculate, and I really don't want to speculate because I wasn't there.
Okay. And look, I wouldn't want to know this. I don't have a brother, but I wouldn't want to know this about anybody I loved. I mean, the allegations are frankly revolting when you hear about what your brother is accused of doing. On a personal level, I know this would be hard to hear about a family member, so I appreciate you being willing to discuss it with us. And like you, I think there's a lot of people who want more answers.
So many of these, names that we're seeing are names we've heard before. We've heard Bill Richardson before. Obviously, Jean-Luc Brunel is someone who I believe also died of suicide in prison. And these other people, names we've heard. You can read in the filings where the witness Virginia Giuffre, is going through how many times it was. Has difficulty remembering exactly when it was and exactly what age she was at the time, but says that Bill Clinton would have been aware of what was going on, though did not specifically witness it. Again, says Donald Trump there at times, although there was no sexual activity with him. So a lot of what we've already heard, there is this redaction still in here, which is pretty remarkable because this is someone who she has accused, according to this filing, of sexual misconduct, like not just being a witness or being around or something, but actually engaging in illegal sexual activity with her.
Yeah, look, on some level, this is getting incredible to have to parse in this way, knowing what we already know about Epstein. And I think that interview with Epstein's brother really foregrounds how we're all kind of tiptoeing around the obvious. Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of procuring children for prostitution and soliciting a prostitute back in 2008. He was a convicted sex offender for well over a decade before he ended up in jail, most recently where he died. So that combined with testimony like Giuffre's, where she's talking about how there were pictures of nude women all over his houses, that he wasn't shy about talking about his predilections, and the amount of time and the frequency with which these high-profile figures, whether it's Bill Clinton or Donald Trump, were at those properties and in proximity with Epstein, the way it's being discussed, it feels as though everyone should have known, especially given that people were continuing these relationships long after the point in time in which he was already a convicted child sex trafficker. So for the brother to sit there and be like, I don't really know. He's my brother. I wasn't there. You weren't there. You had no proximity and relationship to your brother, who apparently was so open about his habits that he had framed pictures of these women all around his house. You have Donald Trump being famously quoted as having said about Epstein, "It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side."
Yeah, it's reminiscent of the fact that jokes were told about Harvey Weinstein, like at award ceremonies. Family Guy made a joke about it. Like for years and years, there were jokes about him, and everyone kind of went, "Oh, ha ha." But they knew, so they knew on some level that what was going on. That's what it reminds me of.
And Melinda Gates separating from Bill Gates in part over her discomfort with their relationship. I mean, the evidence
and Bill Gates is frankly
wall.
one of the worst offenders here in terms of continuing to associate with Epstein long after his criminal behavior was prosecuted, was that he was convicted of, and continuing to have a business relationship with him, continuing to exchange emails. That's also true of these couple officials at Bank of America and in the Virgin Islands, et cetera. So, yeah, it continues to be lurid and horrible.
Of that? I mean,
it's not just having a good time. I'm glad Leland, of course, jumped on him for saying that, because it's not just having a good time, like you're partying too hard. These were underage girls.
These are girls.
Yeah.
These are girls that were around. And apparently, according to Guy, the purpose of their presence was known. Now, it's hard for me to imagine that wouldn't be the case. Why else would a bunch of 60-year-old men have some girl who is not their peer in business, in politics, in life, in any respect, around all of the time? Let's not act Pollyanna. Let's not act like we were born yesterday. So, I mean, the implications of this are interesting, because there is, on some level, even from Guy, she's saying, I cannot attest to these powerful people like Trump or Clinton having personally used the quote-unquote services, personally engaged in sex trafficking with these girls, use these girls who have been sex trafficked for that purpose. However, and so the criminal element, this isn't a conversation about their criminal culpability, at least at this point. But I think that doesn't preclude having a conversation about what this means about society, what it means about the elite culture and the culture of protecting the bad habits and bad actions of the elites among us. If some of the most powerful people in the world, British royal family, who has been accused of actually engaging in these sex acts, are able to do so with a level of impunity that they are openly hanging out with a convicted sex offender for years, without the press, without their other powerful peers, without anybody raising enough of a stink to put an end to
Jeffrey
it.
Epstein himself was able to do it with impunity at some level. He was prosecuted and then got a light sentence and house arrest, and then was able to get right back at it. He was able to lobby the government of the Virgin Islands to change their sex offender laws to make his life less inconvenient.
Yes. And
that's remarkable.
And it's worth noting also that he got that sweetheart deal from a prosecutor who ended up being Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor, who had to quietly step down when that came to light. But even that didn't have anywhere close to the level of fanfare that we're now engaging in over speculation about, say, Hunter Biden's business practices. I would argue that this merits at least as much scrutiny.
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to note. Yeah, I've covered a lot of sex crimes cases for young people when they interact with social media. I used to cover just kind of school policies and school disciplinary matters more. And they're really sad, frustrating stories. Teens exchanging dirty photos with each other, and if they're, one is 16 and one is 17, it's different in every state, but it can often count as child pornography, and you get these really harsh sentences and sex offender registration for kids who are engaging in, again, not their parent, should be grounded or something, but they're not sex criminals for having interest in people their own age. But they get the book thrown at them, they get their lives wrecked, they get no access to electronics, and these charges stick, they're hard to get around. So the idea that people in that situation have no way out of a totally unfair but just rigidly applied the law the way it's written, they're screwed. But the most powerful people, accused of, and then in Jeffrey Epstein's case, found guilty of disgusting transgressions of the law, it's a minor inconvenience. It's incredible. It's very sad.
Yes, one rule for the billionaire class, another rule for the rest of us, it seems. Stick around. We have more Rising for you right after this.